Committee will come to order. Good afternoon, everyone. I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Further ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As this is a remote hearing, I'd like to remind members of some key regulations from the House Committee on Rules to ensure this hearing goes smoothly. I understand this is new to many of us, and so I ask your indulgence. Before I do that, I'd also like to just acknowledge that we're conducting this hearing as leaders in our communities at a time when our country is going through very difficult circumstances. We have lost 100,000 of our fellow citizens to a terrible pandemic, and we are watching violence erupt in a major American city. And so I ask that we all take a moment to pray for our country and for the people of Minnesota. And with that spirit of prayerfulness and justice, that we conduct ourselves in a way that lends credit to the House of Representatives. And I know the ranking member joins me in those concerns. So bear with me, everyone. Let's just go through some of the new procedures and facets of this remote hearing, although in most ways it will be very familiar and resemble the hearings that we do all the time. So a few things from the House rules. First, members must be visible on screen for purposes of identification when joining this hearing. Members must also continue to use the video function of today's software platform, that's Cisco WebEx, for the remainder of the time they are attending the hearing. Your video must be on unless experiencing connectivity issues, obviously, or other technical problems. If you're having such problems, please inform committee staff as quickly as possible so you can receive assistance. A chat function is available for the members on the Cisco WebEx platform for this purpose. Members can also call the committee's main phone line at 202-225-4472 for technical assistance at any time. Members are also not to participate remotely in any other proceedings that may be occurring simultaneously. It is the responsibility of each member seeking recognition to unmute their microphone prior to speaking. To avoid any inadvertent background noise, I request that all members keep their microphone muted when not seeking recognition to speak. Very similar to a committee hearing where you would not turn your microphone on unless you were speaking. So please, we all know the hazards of being unmuted when you don't want to be. My advice is make sure you're muted right now. The default function, as I understand, is that you will all be unmuted. So mute yourselves until you wish to be recognized. Should I hear any inadvertent background noise, I'll request you to do so. That is, mute your microphone. Finally, despite being a remote hearing, I want to emphasize that all the standard rules of decorum apply. As the chair of today's proceeding, I will make a good faith effort to provide every member experiencing any connectivity issues an opportunity to participate fully in the proceedings. Members will have standard 5 minutes to ask questions. To insert a document into the record, please have your staff email it to the committee's clerk, Mike Twincheck at mike.twincheck@mail.house.gov. This hearing is also being live streamed for the public to view. I'd repeat that, it is being live streamed for the public to view. I know many of us have participated in informal Zoom chats over the last few weeks. This is a public live stream of the committee's proceeding. Well, good morning. And welcome to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee's first ever video conference hearing to examine the state of the U.S. maritime supply chain amid the COVID-19 pandemic. It is unfortunate that this pandemic prevents us from conducting this hearing in person, but the Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation has been around in one form or another throughout our country's history, and I'm confident in the subcommittee's ability to address the unique issues facing the maritime transportation system as well as the U.S. Coast Guard. As we all know and adjust to this new normal, I look forward to working with Ranking Member Gibbs and other members of the subcommittee to ensure that this body rises to the challenge that our country now faces. And I'd like to thank the Ranking Member in particular for his cooperation in our informal communications up to now. It's not the first time we've been in touch or working on the issues of concern to this committee, even though this is our first public live streamed hearing. So I want to thank him for his generosity and his accommodation at every turn. One cannot overstate the importance of our nation's maritime industry. In a typical year, over $4.6 trillion worth of commerce flows through a maritime transportation system that is rapidly becoming more complex and interconnected. Unprecedented safety measures and a recent decrease in cargo, some of which began before the onset of the pandemic, will challenge the industry for months and years to come. My hope is that this hearing will help the committee better understand the difficulties facing the maritime industry and identify areas of support that may be needed to ensure the seamless movement of cargo and protect the associated maritime jobs. The U.S. maritime industry includes four major components: the internationally traded U.S. flagged fleet, the domestic or Jones Act trades, shipbuilders, and U.S. ports. Longstanding durable maritime statutes such as the Jones Act, Cargo Preference, and the Maritime Loan Guarantee Program have been supplemented by more recent programs such as the Maritime Security Program, Small Shipyard Grant Program, and the Port Infrastructure Development Program. But these programs may not be enough to enable the industry to weather the current pandemic and the associated economic downturn. Unless you live near a port, the maritime industry typically goes unnoticed, even though 90% of our goods are at some point carried by water. While the industry has managed to maintain an acceptable level of service by adapting and instituting comprehensive safety measures, declining cargo volumes threaten the viability of vessel owners and operators, ports, shipyards, and the workers employed by those industries who are vital to our economic and national security. While our ports are projecting a 20 to 30% drop in business, some shipping trades are experiencing a 50% drop in cargo for the second quarter of 2020. It is unclear what the U.S. maritime transportation system will face in the coming months and years. What is clear is the need to maintain capacity across all maritime sectors. What may seem expensive now pales in comparison to the investment that would be needed to rebuild those industries from scratch. For instance, the Maritime Security Program, which supports 60 vessels and employs thousands of mariners, ensures that the Department of Defense can project force internationally. While the program currently costs $300 million per year, the U.S. Transportation Command has estimated that the cost to organically replicate the program's capacity would exceed $65 billion. While I recognize that the Maritime Administration has recently released their long-awaited maritime strategy, the lack of a comprehensive plan with concrete goals, action items, and milestones remains a major hurdle for the maritime industry. Without a whole-of-government approach that addresses the entire industry, our maritime supply chain is at risk. The pandemic only amplifies that risk. Although I do not anticipate a positive message, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, thank them for their participation, and I'd ask unanimous consent to assert a joint letter signed by 6 U.S. maritime labor unions into the hearing record without objection, so ordered. I'd now like to call on the ranking member of the subcommittee, my friend Mr. Gibbs, for any opening remarks. And a reminder to unmute yourself, Bob.
Yeah, thanks. That was helpful. Thank you, Chairman Maloney. And also, I want to concur with your initial comments about operating during this COVID-19 virus, unprecedented circumstances, and hopefully we're going to get out of this sooner than later. And also, the tragedy that happened in Minnesota, hopefully that gets resolved, and certainly don't condone any behavior that's going on out there with the riots and all that. So hopefully our friends, our former colleague, the governor out there now, they'll handle that. So today we're looking at impacts of the COVID-19 on the maritime supply chain. However, the coronavirus is not the only large-scale issue causing changes in the supply chain. Industry consolidation, rapid technological change, and changing trade relations with China have also had significant impacts. I hope we learn today about the relative importance of all those issues. After 9/11, the United States and much of our world updated their port security infrastructure and the framework under which port security infrastructure is regulated. Those updates and initiatives were focused on responses to violent physical terrorist acts. Since that time, first then cyber threats and now threats from the coronavirus have posed new challenges to ports and to the supply chain, which ports and vessels in the international and domestic trade vessels are part of. Like recent cyber attacks, the coronavirus response will pressure test the post 9/11 port security and determine whether post 9/11 upgrades were sufficient to respond to a wide array of pressure ports and vessel operators now face, or if the upgrades were too specific a response to potential terrorist threats. In addition to those external threats, there have been significant economic changes post 2008. Those changes are the result of the consolidation of container shipping into increasingly larger vessels owned and operated by ever fewer and more interconnected carriers. In addition, the increasing technological sophistication of logistics operations has also led to tighter, more consolidated schedules and, again, more interconnections within the industry. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the challenges they face in keeping up with the rapid changes in the elements of the supply chain. Of course, we are interested in which of those changes are new and related to the coronavirus, and which are the combination of long-term trends and industry changes. I appreciate Chair Maloney in calling this hearing today. I look forward to seeing what we've learned, and what to learn. And I concur with you, Chairman, that the news might not be too good, but hopefully the news is going to show that we're moving forward in the right way and things are improving. Finally, Chairman, I want to remind members it is our responsibility to mute and unmute ourselves as we seek recognition and ask questions. With that, I will yield back and mute myself.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I'd now like to recognize the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, Mr. Peter DeFazio, whose leadership during this crisis has been nothing short of extraordinary. And I thank him for all he has done to respond to this unprecedented situation. Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Sean Patrick. Thanks to you and Bob Gibbs, ranking member, for willing to conduct the first ever virtual hearing for the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, a committee with more than 200 years of history. It's a fairly extraordinary day, but these are extraordinary times, and in order to get our work done, we're taking extraordinary measures. And this is the first big step toward fully actuating the committee so we can move forward, not only with hearings and oversight, but we can also move forward in the very near future to marking up significant legislation that the country needs. We had a briefing, I think it was 2 weeks now, from the MARAD administrator, and he painted a pretty grim picture of the conditions in the maritime industry, the loss of revenues and movement of freight and supplies. It's everywhere. It's not just in our major commercial ports. It's in many of our smaller ports. So I mean, the crisis runs bi-coastal. It starts in the small mid-emerging ports like Coos Bay in my district to the Port of Miami, Seattle, obviously down to LA, Long Beach. I see Alan there. We have to take action. As you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, this is a critical part of America's supply chain. It is the most important component. And unfortunately, given the definitions in the previous relief bills, we haven't done a lot for ports. They enjoy an odd sort of status, and they don't quite fit into any of the programs that have been adopted so far for the sorts of help they need. We need everything from PPE for port workers, and we've heard a good deal about that, to assistance to deal with the marine terminal operators. Business is way down. They can't pay their rent. The ports can't afford to not get the rent. It just perks up and down the whole chain. Harbor pilots, assist tugs, drayage operators, fuel bunkers. We can't have them all go out of business. Can't reconstitute this easily or quickly. We have to deal with the totality of this industry, not a particular segment. We're looking to develop legislation to provide the Maritime Administration with specific emergency authority to allow it to provide financial relief and assistance to each link in the maritime supply chain that serves both foreign and coastwise in the U.S. And as you pointed out earlier, Mr. Chairman, we are at this hearing, we will be making the case of the need for those funds so we can carry it forward to our appropriators and hopefully maintain the integrity of the system, which we're going to need now more than ever. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. At this time, I'd like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Graves. I don't see the gentleman. He may not be with us at the moment. Are you with us, Mr. Graves? Well, we can certainly come back to him if he's having connectivity issues. So let's move forward with our witnesses for today's panel. Let's thank them all for being here and welcome them to this remote hearing. Today we're joined by Mr. Christopher J. Connor, President and CEO of the American Association of Port Authorities, Mr. Michael Roberts, President of the American Maritime Partnership, Ms. Jennifer Carpenter, Executive President and CEO, the American Waterways Operators, Ms. Lauren Brand, President, National Association of Waterfront Employees, and Mr. Eric Ebling, President and CEO, American Roll-On Roll-Off Carrier, on behalf of USA Maritime. Thank you all for being here today. We look forward to your testimony. Without objection, our witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. Since those written statements are part of the record, the subcommittee requests that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Connor, if you would please unmute yourself and you may proceed.
Well, thank you, Chairman Maloney and Ranking Member Gibbs, for holding this important hearing on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the U.S. maritime supply chain. My name is Chris Connor, President and CEO of the American Association of Port Authorities. AAPA is the unified voice of the seaport industry in the Americas, representing 78 public port authorities in the United States. My testimony today is given on behalf of state and local public agencies located along the Atlantic, Pacific, and Gulf coasts, the Great Lakes, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Our nation's seaports deliver vital goods to consumers, facilitate the export of American-made goods, create jobs, and support local and national economic growth. Ports also play a crucial role in our national defense, a point underscored by the designation of 17 of our nation's ports as strategic seaports by DoD. According to Martin Associates, an internationally recognized economic and transportation consulting firm, the total economic value generated in terms of revenue to businesses, personal income, and economic output at U.S. coastal ports accounts for $5.4 trillion, or 26% of GDP. Over 650,000 Americans are directly employed in jobs generated through the movement of marine cargo through vessel activity. Let me now tell you what seaports in your respective districts are currently experiencing. Containerized cargo declined by 18% in the month of March, year on year. Furthermore, ports have seen a significant increase in blank sailings or canceled vessel calls, resulting in revenue losses for port authorities. While the data are still incoming for the months of April and May, initial indications show declines of 20 to 25% year on year. Following the shutdown of auto production facilities in the Americas, Europe, and Asia, we have seen major reduction in ro-ro cargoes. One major West Coast auto port has experienced a 90% reduction in ro-ro cargo, with only 1 or 2 ship calls expected this month compared to a typical month of 16. At 2 of the largest bulk cargo ports in the United States, movements have declined 15 to 25% year on year. Bulk cargo movements, which includes agricultural products, energy commodities such as oil and coal, as well as chemicals, are down 27% year on year at one large Gulf port. Tourism at our nation's ports has completely evaporated. This has resulted in massive P&L impacts at ports that are heavily weighted in this sector. Indications are that certain South Atlantic seaports overall business is down between 50 to 80% as a result. Small ports around the country have been especially hard hit. At these ports, there are often only 1 or 2 types of cargo being handled. If demand drops, port operations can nearly cease. There are over 800 of these emerging harbors processing less than 1 million tons of cargo per year around the U.S. We're beginning to see furloughs and layoffs in the port industry, and we're also beginning to see that some ports are looking to forego planning for and investment in capital improvement projects. the implications of deferring or canceling investment or other capital improvement programs will be felt long after this pandemic and won't bode well for American efficiency in logistics, nor its competitiveness in global markets. For ports, as for other industries, the future remains uncertain. At this stage of the pandemic, hope for a quick V-shaped recovery have been replaced by the realization of a longer battle ahead. Many members of this subcommittee and a total of 85 members of the House voiced support for port relief in a recent letter to House leadership. You said it best in the letter when you wrote, "It is critical that all of our nation's ports receive much needed assistance to keep supply chains moving and keep both employees and customers safe." We agree. And AAPA urges that Congress include $1.5 billion in economic relief to our nation's public ports in the next coronavirus relief bill. This request is not about recovering lost revenue. It's about ensuring that ports are able to make bond and other debt instrument payments, keep pace with the accelerating cost of protecting workers, and ultimately ensuring that America's seaports and port workers maintain a state of readiness for the eventual economic recovery. Thank you again for inviting AAPA to testify today on this important topic, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Well, I thank the gentleman. Now proceed to Mr. Roberts. You may proceed. Please unmute, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chairman Maloney. Thank you, and Ranking Member Gibb. Chairman DeFazio, members of the subcommittee, I am honored to appear before you on behalf of the American Maritime Partnership, representing almost all segments of the domestic maritime industry and producing 650,000 jobs across the nation. My message is simple. I have seen firsthand how American Maritime has responded to this crisis, and I must tell you, I am so very proud to be associated with this community. Nobody knew how this was going to unfold, and there's still a lot we don't know. There are gaps in the rule book from this black swan event, but decisions have to be made, and these are the times when character and culture take over, when we make the best choices we can in good faith. Our industry wouldn't say there's some risk in being outside our homes, so we'll stay inside safe and COVID-free. American Maritime just wouldn't do that. We have to choose. We choose to go outside our homes so that the grocery stores in San Juan and Honolulu and Anchorage are stocked up, so that the basic commodities, lumber, iron ore, grains, petroleum, almost everything, building blocks for almost everything, those commodities can keep moving on our rivers and Great Lakes, so that our harbors are kept clear and so that we can keep building modern ships to keep our supply chain working. I'm proud to be part of this community, and I'm grateful for the leadership that we've seen from our government. Admiral Busby started industry calls in March, and they have been invaluable for sharing information, what's working, what's not working, where we need help. I remember at the end of the first call, Admiral Busby saying, these are the kinds of times when leaders lead. The leadership we've seen throughout the industry has been extraordinary, from the top executives to the ship captains to the line mariners who lead by setting the right example by their behavior. We've seen other organizations that have behaved differently. They throw up their hands and say, the government hasn't told us what to do. Maritime hasn't handled it that way. We have to figure it out. And I will single out one specific team among many, the Ship Operators Cooperative Program, which put together a thoughtful and detailed set of protocols for how to prevent COVID infection from reaching vessel crews and how to deal with it if it happens. Other groups have done similar work, and all of it needs to be updated almost constantly because more information keeps coming in. So my key message is that the character and culture of the American maritime industry is driving leaders at every level to find solutions to keep people safe and keep supply chains moving. I want to emphasize a point made in my written testimony, which is that a cargo ship should never be quarantined. A mariner who is sick with COVID should be removed and given treatment as safely and quickly as possible. The rest of the crew should safely come off the vessel and go to quarantine. The vessel should be thoroughly sanitized, a new crew brought in, and then resume providing the essential services to the communities they serve. Leadership in times like this requires exercising judgment, using a 360 view of everything impacted by a decision. Quarantining a ship, sending it to anchor is less safe to the local port community and everyone else involved than sending the ship to a secure terminal where the best controls are in place. Finally, it is the 100-year anniversary of the Jones Act, a perfect opportunity to celebrate the dedication of the men and women of American Maritime, those whose actions throughout this crisis and many other crises over the years exemplify the character that I've been talking about. It is also disappointing that a few people have chosen to use this crisis to attack American Maritime because we're not as cheap as the Chinese maritime industry. As this subcommittee heard last October, the Chinese maritime industry serves China's interests quite well, controlling ports at key locations around the world, using government subsidies to dominate shipbuilding and global shipping so that they can dominate global trade. And in this country, there are some who seem to think that's okay. They will gladly sideline American mariners and destroy this maritime industry that contributes so much to safety and security so that they might get shipping services a little cheaper. It's unfortunate that they tried to use this terrible crisis and the 100-year anniversary of the Jones Act to pursue that goal, and we appreciate this subcommittee's support in rejecting those efforts. With that, I want to thank you again, Chairman Maloney, Ranking Member Gibbs. Both of your leadership has been exceptional, and we'll welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Ms. Carpenter, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to testify on behalf of America's tugboat, towboat, and barge industry. The first thing I want to tell you today is that the domestic maritime supply chain has proven resilient in the face of COVID-19. While cargo volumes are down in many sectors due to depressed demand, mariners have continued to report to work, vessels have continued to operate, and the industry has adapted to maintain operational continuity and readiness. As our nation takes the first steps toward reopening, the domestic maritime supply chain is capable of accommodating increased demand and well-positioned to support the long road to recovery. Our industry has been able to maintain business continuity because employers recognized early on that protecting crew member health and safety is the key to keeping commerce flowing. A tow on the river or an articulated tug barge unit at sea is effectively self-quarantined, and companies quickly put in place procedures to keep the virus off their vessels. These include pre-screening crew members prior to boarding, modifying crew change procedures, minimizing non-essential contact between crew members and non-crew members, and more stringent vessel cleaning and decontamination procedures. Crew members have taken seriously their status as essential workers and taken steps to safeguard their health while off duty. And the U.S. Coast Guard has been proactive and cooperative in working with industry to meet regulatory objectives while reducing health and safety risks. The result of these efforts has been to keep COVID-19 infections among the mariner workforce to a minimum. Your leadership in holding this hearing tees up the question, what can Congress do to support the continued resilience of the maritime supply chain? In testimony before this subcommittee last spring, I highlighted 4 pillars that enable our industry to do its essential work: the Jones Act, modern, well-maintained ports and waterways infrastructure, a nationally consistent system of laws and regulations governing vessels and interstate commerce, and maritime safety. Congress's support for these pillars is especially important today. The Jones Act is more relevant than ever, as both the pandemic and the prevailing geopolitical situation underscore what a bad idea it would be to relinquish control of our domestic maritime supply chain to foreign companies and foreign mariners. Thank you for your leadership in opposing opportunistic calls to waive the Jones Act and break faith with the American companies and American mariners on the front lines of keeping our economy afloat. Investment in ports and waterways infrastructure is an investment in American jobs and competitiveness that will help our economy get back on its feet. We thank you for your past leadership and ask for your continued support to pass a Water Resources and Development Act, increase investment in locks, dams, harbor maintenance, and dredging, build the next generation of Coast Guard buoy tenders, and ensure the funding to keep them operating. As we recover from the economic shocks of the pandemic, we need to ensure that our waterways are open for business and in condition to accommodate increased demand. Our industry's experience during COVID-19 has also underscored the importance of uniform federal laws and regulations governing vessels in interstate commerce. As state and local stay-at-home orders proliferated this spring, we could have experienced catastrophic disruption in the maritime supply chain. We didn't, largely because the federal government acted quickly to codify the status of maritime businesses and workers as essential critical infrastructure that needed to continue unfettered operations. The lessons of this experience are clear. Just as a patchwork of stay-at-home orders is incompatible with the effective functioning of the maritime supply chain, so is a patchwork of state and local regulations established for other purposes. Finally, maritime safety. Our industry's experience with COVID-19 demonstrates that good safety is good business. As we manage the health and safety challenges posed by the pandemic, we urge Congress to support our efforts by supporting prioritized access to testing for COVID-19 for crew members, enacting targeted temporary liability protections for maritime employers who make good faith efforts to abide by applicable public health guidelines to protect their employees from COVID-19 while preserving legal remedies against employers who engage in reckless or willful misconduct, and enacting the Coast Guard Authorization Bill, which includes a number of provisions to promote marine safety. Thank you very much. We look forward to working with you to apply the lessons of this pandemic and strengthen the resilience of the maritime supply chain.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Ms. Brand, you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman Maloney, Ranking Member Gibbs, Chairman DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Lauren Brand, and I'm president of the National Association of Waterfront Employers. The members of NAWI and I thank you for keeping our nation's ports open during this global pandemic. Your designation of waterfront workers is essential, and your recognition of the entire port ecosystem as being critical has strengthened our commitment to work. NAWI is the voice for the U.S. Marine Terminal operators, stevedores, and operating port authorities. We represent interests in U.S. coastal ports and U.S. territories. Members also include the associations responsible for labor relations and contract negotiations with the ILA and the ILWU, from Maine to Texas and from Washington to California. Port operators are responsible for safely and effectively transporting cargoes between vessels, trucks, and rail. NAWI's members lease waterfront land from public port authorities, and they build their own facilities. Within their terminal area, they hire labor. They fund the purchase of cargo moving equipment, construct intermodal infrastructure, and design systems that track each shipment. We are experiencing 4 significant COVID-19 related challenges: taking care of waterfront workers, adjusting safety protocols while continuing terminal operations, rearranging terminal facilities to accommodate new needs, and maintaining liquidity. Taking care of waterfront workers has been our first priority. Commercial supply chains for PPE and cleaning supplies are now in place. The rapid price increases experienced for PPE these past 3 months, frankly, was crippling. Next, in an effort to increase safety while continuing to work, terminal operations and protocols have been adjusted. Every aspect of each operating terminal has been taken into consideration. It is important to note that labor and management are working together to implement the best decisions and provide protections. Also, terminal facilities have been rearranged to accommodate your needs. The storage of abandoned cargoes, while only 1.5%, is expected to grow. Envision 40,000 chocolate bunnies within just one container that should have been delivered for the Easter holiday. Storage of stranded cargoes is increasing, requiring regular monitoring of units to ensure they're handled correctly. Examples of stranded cargoes include parts for manufacturing facilities, summer fashions, and automobiles. Exports are being impacted. Reduction in vessel calls to ports has resulted in higher value cargoes that pay the vessel operator more to ship being loaded first, delaying the export of lower valued items. Quarantines and the additional screening of workers under newly implemented safety protocols are having a direct impact on security duties and costs. Maintaining liquidity in the face of reduced revenues and increased costs is our fourth challenge. Examples of stressors on liquidity include the management of empty containers that are stacking up in terminals on the Gulf Coast. Now member container yards have units in them that have not moved for months, generating a 100% decline in revenues. Another example are lease payments. Marine terminal agreements include a lease rate and a minimum annual guarantee based on volumes. As throughputs decline below normal levels, these guarantees result in increased operating costs for terminal operators. Certain COVID-related needs do remain unmet. The cost of ensuring that equipment and machinery are safe to use exceeds that of the cost of disinfectant. Added to this are safeguarding costs, such as conducting regular temperature checks for several thousand employees and visitors as they enter each terminal facility daily. No sector of freight is immune to the impact of COVID-19. Beyond freight, our members also support the provisioning of cruise ships and assist cruise passengers. Cruise ships are now accepting bookings for cruises beginning late July, and the public is responding. Marine terminal operators are strategically planning to protect employees, waterfront workers, and the guests who will transit through terminals on their way to vacation. It is the cost of all of these actions necessary to keep marine terminals open, people safe, and essential freight moving that is our problem. In conclusion, marine terminal operators, stevedoring firms, and operating port authorities remain committed to ensuring the transportation needs of the United States are met. We urge you to enact a bridge program that will assist waterfront employers and port authorities defray COVID-19 related expenses, including lease and all other expenses necessary to keep the ports open, terminals operating, and workers employed. Thank you for this opportunity. We appreciate the dedication of the subcommittee and their continued support for U.S. port operators.
Thank you, Ms. Bren. I think that image was meant to alarm us, but I have to say you had me at 40,000 chocolate bunnies. It's about the best image I think I've had in days. So we have one more witness, Mr. Ebling. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Eric Ebeling, and I am testifying today on behalf of USA Maritime, a coalition consisting of American flag vessel operators and owners, trade associations, and maritime labor, committed to ensuring that the U.S. Merchant Marine will always be available to support our warfighters, enhance our economy through trade, and provide great jobs to thousands of Americans across the country. As President and CEO of American Roll-On Roll-Off Carrier Group, a USA Maritime company, it's my honor to lead an incredibly talented team of men and women at the largest U.S. flag railroad operator. ARC has reflagged 5 new vessels into U.S. registries since 2016, including 3 vessels in 2019, and all of our vessels are crewed by American mariners and fly the American flag. The U.S. flag fleet operating in international trade primarily consists of the militarily useful and commercially viable Maritime Security Program, or MSP fleet, of 60 ships, the attendant global networks, and a mariner base of over 2,400 highly trained and loyal U.S. citizen merchant mariners that support U.S. Transportation Command and the Joint Deployment and Distribution Enterprise. It would cost the government tens of billions of dollars to attempt to try to replicate the capabilities provided. The success of a commercially viable U.S. flag international fleet is predicated on several factors, all of which must be present together. The MSP Readiness Retainer Stipend, which provides a strong base, U.S. government-generated preference cargoes that must move on U.S. flag ships, and commercial cargo, which is not required to move on U.S. flag vessels, but fills the remainder of the vessel. The COVID-19 crisis has devastated the cargo segments, thereby undermining the central tenet of the U.S. flag international fleet. The latest statistics compiled by MARAD for April 2020 show government-impelled revenue declined by at least 47% across the MSP fleet versus April 2019. Globally, there are currently 524 container ships in layup, equivalent to 2.65 million TEU capacity. And on the RoRo side, global light vehicle sales in April dropped 45% year on year. A particularly telling statistic is that USMCA area produced only 4,840 light vehicles in April, which would not even fill one PCTC RoRo vessel. Smart and effective maritime policy, whether legislative or executive action, has always underpinned the success or failure of the U.S. flag fleet in international trade. And the COVID-19 crisis is no exception. Some have not unreasonably queried whether U.S. flag carriers operating under MSP can access $17 billion set aside for defense contractors under the CARES Act. Due to the DX priority or valid top secret requirements, they cannot. The fundamental question is what level of readiness is being sought for the U.S. flag MSP fleet in international trade. The stipend by itself is not enough to maintain any approximation to normal service. Congress and the administration should consider 3 actions to ensure that the MSP fleet and the thousands of mariner jobs that go with it remain at the ready to support national defense and economic security missions. First, Congress should consider an emergency stipend through the remainder of FY20 and, if necessary, beyond, aimed at addressing the extraordinary costs for readiness that are being borne by MSP carriers. Put another way, carriers would be compensated for their maintenance of service and readiness, as opposed to putting ships in cold layup or scrapping or recycling or flagging out, as carriers might otherwise do if not dedicated to supporting DoD and the JDDE. As per its previously submitted detailed proposal, USA Maritime urges Congress to authorize and appropriate $109.8 million or $1.83 million per MSP vessel for the current fiscal year, as well as to authorize $109 million for the first half of FY21 to be appropriated if needed. This is what is necessary to maintain full service levels, full employment, and minimize impacts to national security. Second, 100% of all government-owned or financed cargoes should be required to move on U.S. flag ships. It's a rather simple equation. Without cargo, carriers will not invest in ships, and without ships, there will not be jobs for merchant mariners. And without those merchant mariners, the government-owned reserve fleet cannot be crewed. In a letter addressed to this committee dated May 15, 2020, signed by Transcom Commander General Stephen Lyons, he called for requiring, quote, 100% of all government-impelled cargoes to be transported on U.S. flagged vessels, close quote. USA Maritime strongly endorses the recommendation. Third, consider accelerating the recapitalization of the government-owned sealift fleet, specifically the Ready Reserve Force fleet, in the most cost-effective manner, which is to buy used foreign-built ships with a first priority for used MSP or visa ships. 86% of the 35 RoRos in the RRF today were foreign-built, so this would hardly be treading new ground. RRF ships today average 45 years old, and RRF sealift readiness rates are only 59%. But as a result of the COVID crisis, there are now more readily available used foreign-built ships. DoD should act on the 7 authorizations already in place, and Congress should authorize and appropriate for additional purchases in the near term. This subcommittee and the members of it have been stalwart supporters of our U.S. maritime industry. You understand well the many sacrifices that American mariners endure to service this nation, including during this pandemic, as these essential workers continue to deliver the goods. I close by highlighting another excerpt from the aforementioned Transcom letter to this committee dated May 15th, in which General Lyons stated, quote, given the economic downturn as a result of COVID-19, I urge you to favorably consider the relief requests from visa and MSP carriers. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, gentlemen. We will now proceed to members' questions. Just a word to those who may be new to the technology. If you participate using the grid view, you'll also see one of the grids is occupied by the 5-minute clock for purposes of monitoring your own time. May be useful. Also, a reminder: you're 4th or 5th today. You are presumptively unmuted, so you all have yourselves muted. Please continue to do so unless you are recognized. Now, proceed to 5-minute rounds of questioning, and I would like to yield to the chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Patrick, I appreciate the opportunity to go first. To Michael Roberts on the issue of quarantining. Is this an ongoing problem where crews are being quarantined on freighters, or have we gotten past that?
Yes, thank you for the question. It is an issue of grave concern in most markets. There was an article today about a tanker in Brazil that had been quarantined for over a month that is continuing under quarantine. That has not happened in the United States. We with the great cooperation from the maritime labor, we've had very few incidents of infection on board ships. And we've had good indications that if and when that happens, that there will be an appropriate response at the local level, that the ship will not be sent to anchor, that it will be sent to a secure terminal facility where the infected person can be taken off safely and taken to treatment quickly. The crew can be quarantined, the ship can be sanitized, and it can be returned to service. That's extremely important in certain markets where these ships provide just-in-time cargo to consumers. The concern is that is not a nationally recognized standard at this point, that we're still that there have been incidents where there was a suspected case where the ship was sent to anchor, and then you have to have the medical staff climb the ladder to get on the ship to administer this test, and it's very, very unsafe, and it's not it's not the best place to do to respond to that sort of incident. So we really hope that the Coast Guard and CDC will work together with the industry to recognize what the right response plans are in each port.
Great. We'll. I think that'd be something for the committee to follow up on. That's an excellent point. Thank you on that. Thanks also for bringing up the 100th anniversary of the Jones Act. Yeah, I've been jumping on those who are looking at this as an opportunity to undermine the Jones Act, and thus far we've been pretty successful in pushing back on them. To Eric Ebling, you mentioned for ROROs, they weren't eligible for. I've run into this before. And how much money did you say was in that fund that they weren't eligible for because they aren't doing highly classified work?
Yes, sir. That's the CARES Act, and there's $17 billion in the fund that is available to national defense, but U.S. flag carriers are not eligible for it because we are not under those classifications. Yeah,
I think we should. I've run into that with a trucking company that does a lot of DoD work too, and I think staff will need to follow up with Treasury and see how much of that money has been committed. Maybe we need to look at modifying the rules for who is eligible and who isn't eligible if the money is just sitting there unallocated. So thanks for bringing that up. And then the last question to Lauren Brand. I'm obviously still a bit dubious about cruise lines at the end of July, but I understand they are selling tickets, and some of them do intend to sail. And hopefully they won't be populated by the people who were at the pool party and the bar in Lake of the Ozarks. So can you tell us what measures are going to be taken, particularly landside? I guess once these people sail, it's up to them. And oh, by the way, if they're flagged in Malta and they have a problem, they should call for the Maltese Navy, or if they're flagged in Liberia, they should call for the Liberians to send medical assistance. But if you would comment on what we're going to do on the land side, that would be helpful. If you can do that quickly, my time's about up.
Thank you for that question, sir. I'm not prepared to answer it in completeness, and what I would like to do is get the information and submit it on Monday. Is that acceptable?
Absolutely, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean Patrick. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Reclaiming my time. I'm at this time going to recognize Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to say to all the witnesses, thank you for all your hard work. I hear optimism to you and your leadership. You know you've got tough times ahead, and I just want to recognize you all to come and tell us about your challenges, and hopefully Congress will be able to react to some of your proposals, assistance. You know, after 9/11, the United States and much of the world, we updated our port security infrastructure framework, and mostly to focus on responses from violent physical terrorist attacks. And then, of course, we had cyber challenges, and now with the recent coronavirus response, you know, that event's going to pressure test our systems and design U.S. ports safe and secure. That added pressure will determine if existing regulatory systems are sufficient to provide ports with the broad resilience they need if these schemes are focused too narrowly on the response to terrorist attacks. And my first question is to any of the panelists, I guess, do current port safety and security regimes in the United States provide the level of resiliency necessary to protect our ports and our supply chains that rely on ports against the spread of the coronavirus from vessels to land, cyber threats, and also national disasters? And if no, actions which recommended we take domestically to improve our port infrastructure and supply chain resiliency against the multiple threats the industry now faces. I'm just opening up to any of the panelists.
Yeah, I can take a first shot at that. This is Chris Connor, and thank you for that question, Congressman. I think cyber attacks are always a threat, and it would be a very risky response for me to be cavalier and say that we've got that mastered, because I don't think anyone ever will, and we need to stay resilient. And it's also fair to say that the distractions brought on by the current pandemic certainly may leave us compromised in some ways. Saying that, I will say that the port industry in particular spends a lot of time of that. We have a technical committee within our association that focuses on security. Some of our members are quite sophisticated and are willing to share some of their expertise with other members to better prepare them. And we also work with DHS and through CISA to make sure that we're on top of all the risks. But there's no doubt there's increased threats at the particular time. I think it's hitting people on many levels, not just on the business level, but also on the individual consumer level with the actors out in the theater. So this is an area that gets a lot of attention for the port industry. Thank you.
If I may supplement what Mr. Connors just said, the National Association of Waterfront Employers also has a security committee, and we talk about everything Mr. Connor just mentioned, and we also address drones. There's technology that's changing that frankly is frightening, and I'm not sure that we have enough protocols in place to address everything. We work very closely with DHS and the other agencies that impact this issue.
Okay, thank you. I want to go get another question in, but these COVID-19 related needs, vessel operators and marine terminals, and also what you look at the long-term unfunded needs in ports due to large structural changes. What kind of money do you think we're looking at, or what are you looking at long-term? Any idea? I guess I might go to Ms. Brand, maybe.
Thank you very much for the question, sir. Unfortunately, you cut out a little bit. I just wanted to make sure that the question is, what's the projection of what would be needed to assist with the COVID-related expenses that we're enduring?
Yes,
okay.
Basically, yes.
Our association believes that about $400 million should help ports and terminal operators with just PPE, cleaning supplies, and incidental changes made to facilities, separating people, social distancing, the things recommended by the CDC. As I said before, cleaning of equipment costs more than the actual cost of the disinfectant itself. So about $400 million would just be that one expense, sir. And then about $1.5 billion might cover everything else.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody else want to respond? Okay. Well, I'm just about out of time. I'll go back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I'd like to now proceed to Mr. Larson, although I understand Mr. Larson may be having connectivity issues. Rick, are you with us?
Yeah. Yes, I'm with you.
Oh, hello. We can see you. Go ahead. You may proceed.
Yeah. Thanks. I think it's. I think I have it figured out, but I'll pass on later what I think happened. So thanks so much. First questions for the brand. Let me just bring it up here. It has to do with maybe challenges. It's probably all ports, but a lot of temperature sensitive cargo goes to the Pacific Northwest, and egg products, seafood, and so on. With the pandemic impacts on supply chains, are you seeing any issues with the export of these temperature sensitive products, and what are your members doing to resolve that?
Naturally, the members know when the product hits the terminal what kind of special care that commodity needs or that container would need. I've not had any complaints from anyone about things being left behind that are temperature controlled or sensitive like food products. So I will look into it, and I will give you a report back early next week if that's acceptable. I'd also like to say the only product I've heard that's being left at the dock are the real low value items, waste paper, items like that.
Oh, really? Okay. Also, in terms of the supply chain, have any of you, maybe I'll start with Mr. Roberts, what we're doing in our office, just as a matter of course, we're looking at what we need to keep doing after we get through the pandemic and what we're going to stop doing and get rid of and never do again because of the pandemic. Are you learning any lessons about the supply chain that you're going to incorporate moving forward that would be helpful for us to understand and know about in terms of our future legislative planning for Mike Roberts?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question. We're certainly paying a lot of attention to and seeing extraordinary changes in how we do work in the office and on the docks and on the ships. And I'm certain there will be lessons applied going forward. Certainly use of technology as we see today is an eye-opener in terms of how we function. But as far as the supply chains themselves, I need to think about that and get back to you. I don't have a great answer for you right now.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, I will say that the industry in general has experienced remarkably low incidence of COVID outbreaks, on the port footprints. And I think that speaks to the amount of emphasis that both labor and port authorities and marine terminal operators have put into keeping port workers safe. I think it would be a sad outcome to this, this terrible pandemic we've gone through, not to have some profound changes in the way we all work. I have no doubt we'll see, very interesting developments in the terms of especially where people are, touching equipment and things like that, seeing significant improvements. That's already happened. And not to mention the more obvious one where administrative employees found out that we, in many cases, can be pretty darn productive, working in a non-congregated environment. So I think there's lots of lessons, and that story will be told for years to come.
Now, I find my staff's a lot more productive too, and I'm not going by their desks and asking them to do all sorts of things as well.
10-4 on that.
Ms. Carpenter, do you have an answer to that question? Any changes you see coming?
Highlight in particular the use of remote audit and inspection techniques. So our segment of the industry, the tugboat, towboat, and barge industry, is halfway through the phasing in of a very significant regulatory change, towing vessel inspection, or subchapter M. By July 20th of this year, 50% of the U.S. towing vessel fleet needs to have certificates of inspection. And then COVID-19 hit. And so we had to work creatively with the Coast Guard to figure out how are we going to keep getting audits and inspections done while keeping mariners safe, recognizing sometimes you need to defer. This is going to be with us for a long time, and we need to figure out how to do business safely. So we've had very good success working with the Coast Guard, working with Coast Guard approved third-party organizations to use remote audit and inspection techniques to supplement what takes place face-to-face. And I think that's something we're going to continue to refine and improve going forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Weber.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate y'all holding this, and I appreciate you making the recommendation that you go to grid view. Can y'all hear me okay?
We can hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. And when I finally got to grid view, I got to see Alan Lowenthal, and I thought, man, he's wearing a mask, one of those COVID masks. But it actually turns out he has a beard. I don't know how many of y'all thought that. But anyway, it's great to be on with y'all. I appreciate that opportunity. Some questions I want to start with, probably for Chris Connor. You said in your remarks, Mr. Connor, that the supply chains are changing and there's autos and others, and you named a whole bunch of stuff. How long, I know this is speculation, pure speculation, and we'll go to Jennifer, maybe Ms. Lamb, or the other lady later. How long do you think supply chains are going to be interrupted to the point that from a strategic planning point, y'all are going to begin to outline new supply chain, processes, and hoping we can keep as much in the United States? Have y'all looked at that? Any projections, Mr. Connor?
Well, as I mentioned, I think initially, like most of us, everybody back in March thought or hoped, really, it was more hope than thought, we'd have a quick V-shaped recovery. I think time and the reality of the complexities of this pandemic have had a reality check for all of us. And we now project, this is going to be with us, I think, reasonably, at least through the end of this calendar year, 2020. So that's the volume downturn that we're going to experience. I think supply chain disruptions is probably a different discussion and maybe a more complex one as we try and repatriate certain essential products and certain goods back to the U.S. so that we don't put ourselves in this exposed position ever again in the future.
Well, that's our hope, of course. Have you identified certain other countries? And of course, I know China is the main one in the discussion right now, but other areas where we might be thinking of maybe drawing back and trying to do a little bit more business at home. Have you identified those potential interruptions?
Not as yet. I think we've been kind of fighting through the crisis, but I think that's a conversation that I think not only the seaports industry, but the entire logistics industry would like to be a part of, because I think it's an important one we should have as a nation.
All right. Thank you for that. Mr. Ebling, you made some comments that there was an emergency stipend needed for MSB carriers where they might wind up flagging out. Explain that.
Yes, sir. This is more of a maintenance of readiness issue. So as I think the committee is well aware, the MSP stipend today is $5 million per ship per year, and there are 60 enrolled vessels, total program at a cost of $300 million per ship per year. Usually that works in concert with the carriage of U.S. flag preference cargoes and U.S. flag commercial cargoes. This is more of a but-for issue here. So normally carriers would probably be taking actions in terms of laying ships up or reducing or changing service profiles. And what's happening with the MSP fleet is they are all maintaining service, but in order to maintain that service and therefore readiness for the Department of Defense, we believe that it is appropriate to have a additional stipend of $1.83 million per MSP vessel in order for those ships to remain in service and the crews fully employed on board those ships. So I apologize if I was made a misleading statement there, but
so that would include PPE, sanitization, and all of those kinds of things. Is that what you're driving at?
Some of it is the additional costs that are being borne by carriers, and some of it is the lost revenues. Those total in the hundreds of millions of dollars. This is not necessarily to make up for that. It is more just the maintenance of service and the maintenance of readiness in support of our DoD.
Thank you. If I go to Ms. Brand, we're glad you're here. You talked about in your remarks tequila made into hand sanitizer. Was that done in Texas?
Yes, sir.
Just Chairman.
I think, gentlemen, I thank him for his comment on that. Appearance might be a good time to reference House Resolution 965, Regulation D2, which requires members to conform standards of proper as required to participate in the committee's in-person proceeding on property itself. Mr. Garrett. Need I think we may have lost Mr. Garamendi.
I'm muted.
Also connect, but I can hear.
Good.
You
I am sure that with my dress.
Parts were coming from the.
Fits where I got
it. Being appropriate. You may
I want to cover a couple of different issues here. First of all, this one is for Mr. Connor. Introduce this with the Special Districts Beneficial Act. We have about 20 on it. It is specifically designed to address the issue that you spoke to about ports not being able to participate in the CARES Act and presently not able to participate in the HEROES Act either. I represent 37 special districts required to report really honor the Port Authority consider supporting this effort so that we provide the necessary to your test.
And the answer is resounding yes. My staff has made me aware of that proposed legislation, and that is bring funding. So thank you for leadership on.
I know there are 15 of my colleagues on here, so this was my opportunity to give you a heads up to get on board. Mr. Lowenthal, specifically, I don't think you're on board. You do present a couple of boards, special districts, keeping that in mind. My next goes to Mr. Ibbeling. Three things that those are specifically, some of it in the DA, and I suspect will speak the code bill, which has been specifically with regard to cargo reference. Now working on the A to put in a very comprehensive government go in America. I think I would hope in that effort to require every mask, every swab, and every other thing from the military on beyond American flag vessels. Are you familiar with that? Or are you in support of that effort?
Yes, Maritime is familiar supportive of preference of government health.
Other issue you spoke to, you just handled. I hope put that to the NA, the code also, and that the stipend, the present program. Be working that. Again, this is more with my colleagues that are on board with the familiar issues. Those that I have. Thing I wanted to also know the witness engaged in, and that is the national essentially use and repurposing the Jones can be made militarily address the occurs in the sea surge potential that we do not have should going forward. So that national strategy is based on this act. Purpose some of them make them military use, and then ships that go into the Jones be made in a way that is militarily useful, and supporting that with the deployments. Go at that. Thank you, Tony. Thank you for being the first. Watch my fourth. I yield back.
More being the first. You may proceed.
Mr. Chair, I put it on as soon as you that because I didn't want to shame you. I will not pan the camera down, however, to apprise you as to whether I'm wearing or slacks. But
as gentlemen, you may.
Thank you. Spoke to the port today, my district of coronavirus. Mentioned act was instructing lakes that made like a bit of an sequitur. Lakes are dependent on ice breaking the coast is in still ongoing when coronavirus hit. We are extending a second virus the winter season. The whole pandemic perhaps start is what would happen if the Mackinac breaker was out of service? So how a region cannot in response to the virus the months.
Thank you, Congress. No, it's a great, and the answer we will in really get we have while we've talked about coronavirus specific like priority earners, there are things that dictation that are critical keeping the so breaking buoy directed by the Corps of Engineers package of start author that need now more ensure that something recovery adding going for your committee us important need.
I'd ask any comment on our needs, and if not, to my final question, which is another key connection point, single point of failure for the Great, which through which closed during icy winters, they reopened 20 again just as I was hitting. It's so the question is what would happen to law mountain beginning of this? How this impaired the ability to respond to outbreak, translating basic PPE to combat the virus? I don't know who to take that. Ms. Carpenter, who else does?
Sure. Thanks, Congress. I think that leads to the conference. It would have been terrible had another option virus during waterways infrastructure inability to do the kinds of waterways management funds that enable supply function pandemic not just problems that can ill anytime and especially now.
I appreciate that. This, my line of questions, I think we learned a big with Corona. We're talking about single in our supply economy, existing single points of failure when it comes to icebreakers and a lot of things that directly affect Midwest every single year, and we keep our eye off all and with a yield, Chairman.
Gentlemen, Mr. Lowenthal. Mr. Lowenthal, you may be on activities.
Thank you.
You're cutting in and out. You need to unmute.
I mean,
I believe you can proceed. Go ahead, Alan. Try. Here's those still muted. You're muted. I think we'll return to Mr. Thal in the order. Brings up in the order Mr. Brown. If you rejoin, we can go ahead and. Mr. Noble, I'd like to proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. Different forms lose where the button is. Thank you for hosting this here important time. Certainly, the gate, the Transportation Infrastructure Committee holding a virtual or online remote. Argue to support on the East Coast. It has a portfolio of containers, automobiles, farm, off car products. First among all U.S. ports, volume of vehicle car consecutive year. And while the Baltimore saw a record year in 2019, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a severe impact on its import of not only the country but the world. In April of this year, total cargo tonnage fell 11% from the same time of the previous year. Biggest decline since the Corona pandemic. And for the most part, the port of Baltimore has remained up. However, America Chesapeake, the private operator, imports private operators of the Seagirt Marine Terminal. They've closed Seagirt last 2 due in container planes. Mr. Connor, a question for you, a fairly general, broad question. The automobile industry is portable testimony in that while pre-automate brought production on what demand may and how this decision impacted market. In combat, better support, support, but certainly the Baltimore. If the automobile roll-off cargo volumes not bounce back.
Yeah. Question, and I would, the relief go a long way to adapt to volume. What Baltimore is experiencing, reference April, I would say that what they're experiencing in June, and the reason is in April, the volume still going to supply in June have little, if any, volumes. Production is now starting to resume from Europe, from Asian, as well as U.S. expertise. So what Congress is with the request today.
Thank you. Time remains. Ms. Written testimony, you mentioned need national the more effective. Specific state or local threatened distress during the pandemic, and what takeaways can you give us?
Thanks, Congressman. I think what we actually see in the pandemic really example can work in cooperative action between federal government. Federal government, the security agency, merit as an essential structure. So, and state, locality, and stay at home, many of them incorporated that. They did. We had the first when, for example, from Louisiana to potentially half permission on a case-by-case basis to 8. But we saw very good integration in recognizing the quality of maritime transportation and working through the issue so that we didn't have a bottleneck. See that rotated forward.
The takeaway seems to be that things are working well, coordination is happening. That way.
I think my key takeaway is with federal leadership, as in this case, in the state feds, we would have a problem. The government first that nation is a.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, gentlemen. And if we have Mr. Lowenthal back with us, we'll proceed Mr. Lowenthal after Mrs. Miller. Mrs. Miller, proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Maloney and Ranking Gibbs, and thank you for taking the different circumstances we have all together, punching all over. Shipping is so essential, and even in Inland, Southern West Virginia, the Huntington Tri-State Port, my district, one of the largest industry and send and connect vast resources of Appalachia, the rest of COVID-19 pandemic has threatened this connection. Congress must stand to make sure that it can be repaired now and made safe and visible challenge. While many Americans have the ability to work during this time and aspect of work and showing that the United States has all the goods it needs, whether the crisis. I personally want to thank you all for workers in time and who have put themselves at risk to make sure that we have PPE, foods, material, and have been able to stock ourselves and get the into our host of the Americas and do. And I want to say for that, Ms. Carpenter, the regulatory actions can Congress to alleviate vessel operators and help them focus on main operation.
Very much. And I will give you a specific example in a bill that has already passed out, that's authored by the committee. There's a provision authored bill to suspend the of towing vessel insurance fees until the Coast Guard promulgates a fee structure that fair and reasonable. Right now, we have a situation where a company that is operating on towing vessels could be paying $500,000 over that are duplicative of that they are already Coast Guard third who are paying services, and also to disincentivize safety management option. Coast Guard third option of its safe benefits. So spending fee promote safety will eliminate cost, will not any serious. It's a no-brainer. Really thank this subcommittee for its leadership. Look forward to a bill passing as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Testimony, you mentioned the need for nationally consistent regulations to make the maritime supply chain more effective. Are there any specific examples of continuing state or local regulations that continue to threaten disruption of vessel traffic outbreaks?
You mentioned in response to Brown's question, we saw during the how we can supply federal exercise leadership, state able to work specific as in the Texas that I get. I that is a model that we need to look to elsewhere, because just a work of stay-at-home orders could completely bollock up the functioning of the supply chain. So could a patchwork of state and local regulations establish work for safety. So the government takes assertion. We have nationwide standards for how to protect the environment that work state at an effective regulatory floor, I think is a critical first step. And then where they're specific, we've got the opportunity to work to ensure that they're met. But again, fellowship, start there.
You sound positive, and that makes me feel good. Thank you. Mr. Roberts, in testimony, you've serious in the domestic industry. I mean, for some of the particularly inland shipping crisis.
Yes, exactly. The industry generally into the and cargo and stocked and so on. The biggest challenge, hard to put your finger on it, but certainly the focus on keep safe. We can't work. They have to jobs, and when we ask them to do that, we have to do everything we can to make sure that so access is to take a priority and make progress there. There's been misunderstanding about how it's advertised to CDC, but I think making progress there, certainly the technology of producing more test kits will get us out of this sooner or later. I'll put that's the issue we've been dealing with.
Is the testing?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I'm going to give Mr. Lowenthal an opportunity. I'm afraid he may be experiencing activity issues. I think you also unmute. Right. We'll lead to Lamb. You're right for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have one. If Lowenthal back, can certainly give time. I have a carpenter about inland waterways. One thing we've really been advocating and pushing for change in the federal share to federal government share. There's some projects like in my area, Western Pennsylvania, we have projects that have been going on for a long time, some that have been delayed for just a found authority. So would you be able to address if we went to 70-25 type of cost or 80-20 or impact and make these problems and how it might be able to start up the work that we're doing, kind of put a lot of people back to work?
Absolutely. I want to thank you personally for your leadership and support inland waterways structure issues. It is important to understand that my test, it really is investment in the competitiveness of the nation. So the executive mentioned increasing the car for construction and major rehabilitation projects on the inland waterways system. Current 50% Treasury, 50% inland ways trust fund and industry paid user fee to say 75 Treasury, 25%. I hadn't thought of 80-20, but I like that better. So if we could get that done, that would be fantastic. This will do is it will expedite the completion of projects that are so important to getting goods to market, to increasing the competitiveness not of vendors and operators, American who depend on those. So it's going to put a little more into the system now, which enables us to get up quickly, saves us over time. Again, an investment in America just throughout the system, from workers who are constructing these infrastructures to the mariners on the vessels to the shippers at plants and mines and factories and farms whose goods move market by water. So thanks so much for everything this committee has done. Really look forward to working with you to make some positive change there.
Thank you very much. I think people really make the connection to the workforce benefits, but I had the chance to be on call with a lot of our local contractors and trade unions here in Pennsylvania, and locking down is a huge source of for the groups of workers, things, bridge work, and I think people connect environmental, but you see lots sending good to the river, in parts of the mine to construct the locks and dams really made a lot of the water drinkable and navigable, makes the roads less. So there's just like a whole cascade of make sure people it'd be a good investment to make right now. So very much on that. Thank you, Mr. for having me. And
Thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to confirm I don't believe there are any further Republican members' questions. Here, and I'd like to, Mr. Paul Lampe is joining the telephone. Still no. I think we can. The technology is, if you have experienced the last, be surprised with these forums. Apologies to Mr. Law, who is something to join by telephone. We provided, given the issues he said, we will need to wrap it 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to the member as well. And getting better with technology, more we will all be with it. But the panel, they're answering the for what your organization do to keep time transportation strong and resilient, especially in this crisis. Most of my questions have been answered, but one I just wanted to go a little bit more into is an issue that two of you have brought up. Is a priority to ensure that we have a strategy to ensure priority for workers in the industry, and I absolutely agree with that. I know that other screening measures have their limitations. Taking temperatures, for instance, where up to half of the individuals who have COVID-19 aren't going to exhibit symptoms, and where you can transmit the virus asymptomatic, critically important for as workers, is in this particular industry where we're working in quarters that have access to this capability. I'm experiencing of members today and Congress do to support tests for maritime industry.
Thanks very much, Congressman. Really appreciate it. Seen some improvement, thankfully, in access to diagnostic testing, but we think that, as we are now in what I'm going to call the chronic phase of the pandemic, a long way to go where we're at. Being able to testing the pre-screen process for crew members is just to be critical, especially as stay orders are nationwide, and there's just going to be a lot more opportunity for exposure off the job. So while I mentioned that, we feel like it's a positive thing that we're able to keep actions on board vessels to minimum, we take nothing for granted. Any Congress can do to encourage the prioritization of access to testing for critical workers, especially mariners who work in proximity, would most appreciate, whether that happens legislatively, whether that happens by encouragement to FEMA and authority. As an example, we were just able as an industry to work with FEMA and the maritime industry to secure a very large shipment, more than 2 million of cloth facial coverings to help workers as they're working closely together, distributed free of charge, or are distributed now free of charge to ports, to maritime entities, and it's a real positive step. So if we can do something similar with respect to testing, we would take a massive step forward in securing the maritime supply chain, so we don't see mariners getting sick, vessels idled, just as we're getting the economy moving again.
How do you have comments on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to comment on that. So I think it's important as we look at this to consider when you look at the Jones Act fleet or the domestic fleet, really about supply chain security, which is, of course, very essential. And then on the international U.S. flag fleet, I think it's also very important to bear in mind the national security defense supply chain aspects. So between the two U.S. flag fleets, domestic and international, we've really got some massive benefits that are and important contributions to the economy and national security. So I would just echo everything Jennifer said in terms of any prioritization of access to testing kits would be hugely helpful. Thank you.
Congressman, if I could jump on one last comment. So within the port industry, there's been a lot of collaboration between ports who are typically, fierce competitors, but, everybody has been collaborating to kind of show the best ways to get the right protocols and processes in place. And, the physical layout of no two ports are exactly the same. So to kind of smooth that out, one area of contention that we could use some assistance is we've had difficulties in getting treatment from CBP. In some ports, CBP staff who come into the same facility, as does Labor and Port Authority, have not agreed to subject themselves to the testing. And that kind of creates an A team versus B team kind of scenario, which is a little bit uncomfortable. So we've been trying to work that through the system, but we probably could use a little shove in that direction.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your comments, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have been rejoined by Mr. Lowenthal again in the absence of a Republican member. Unless Mr. Gibbs, I'm mistaken, I'd like to recognize Mr. Lowenthal for 5 minutes. Alan,
Thank you,
glad to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can hear me now?
Perfectly clear.
That's wonderful. And first, I want to thank everyone, all the members, the witnesses, you, the chair, vice chair, ranking member, and also the Chairman DeFazio for holding this very important hearing. I would like to first ask Chairman Maloney if I could have unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter that the Congressional Ports Caucus developed and sent to leadership, urging Congress to provide relief to ports in future coronavirus legislation.
Without objection.
Thank you. I've been talking to many of the terminal operators in my district and similarly other districts, and it's the same issue. Issues of cleaning supplies and issues of PPE and work hours to adjust to safety issues. And I'd like to respond to, I think it was earlier, Representative Larson's. In my district, the Port of Long Beach, and in my adjacent Port of LA, they have adjusted the gate hours port-wide to allow cleaning between crews that come in. And so we have our ports are open 16 hours a day. And so typically they backed up one to another, but now they've adjusted those port hours to separate them. And I think that's one of the kinds of protective measures that will continue in the future, along with others, about how people congregate and separate people. We've known that my questions have to do with the financial strains that are on terminals and port authorities. And I have pressed Congress and the administration to take steps to aid ports, like opening up municipal lending facilities to port authorities. So my first question is to Mr. Connor. What kind of impact would that have for ports across the country if they had access to zero or low interest federal loans to help them make bond payments, maintain their payrolls? What issues are port authorities seeing with federal loan facilities?
Thank you, Congressman Lowenthal. So I think as Chairman DeFazio mentioned in his opening remarks, you know, the ports, the way that the CARES Act was written, have found themselves in a place where, unfortunately, they have nowhere to turn. That's partly due to the unique governing natures of ports, whether it's city, county, or state-based, and the various governing structures that exist, and partly based on the interpretation by the Fed of what the eligibility was for the MLF fund. If that would be a desirable outcome, sir, if those funds could be made available to port authorities. I think our preference is very much in line with what I requested in both my written testimony and our oral testimony, which is the grant and aid. But certainly to have that access to MLF would also be a good outcome. Thank you.
Ms. Brand, can you elaborate? I was interested in your comments about abandoned cargo piling up at port terminals. Do you see that affecting the congestion that's taking place and also revenues for terminal operators?
Thank you for that question. I did state it's 1.5% right now of volumes, and it's on the West Coast. It's a phenomenon on the West Coast. So no, it's not impacting space as yet, but we're watching and we're monitoring. It does require its own area, and it does become a claim issue when the container is abandoned by the consignee. The marine terminal operator contacts the ship line that delivered it, and it becomes something that the ship line has to resolve with who owns that cargo and who gets access to it. So we're monitoring it. It's something that's a sign, and we're watching the signs.
Thank you. I also would like to respond to Representative Garamendi. Thank you for reminding me about your legislation. We'll see about getting on that right away. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and we thank him for his patience with the technology issues. That concludes, I believe, the first round of questioning. We do not plan to do a second round of questioning, but at this time, I would allow Mr. Gibbs to request a second round, or if you have other members, Bob, who I'm not seeing.
I'm fine. We can. I think we're good. Unless you got it. I don't think there's any other members on, is there? I can't tell.
I don't believe so. And if there are any Democratic members who wish to ask a second question, we can certainly permit that at this time. But seeing none, for purposes, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but for purposes of a clean record, and despite, let me just take 30 seconds to ask each of our witnesses for a short answer on the record. Despite the leadership of Chairman DeFazio and some of us who feel very strongly about a direct assistance, maritime specific assistance to address COVID-19 needs, it's pretty clear to a lot of us that the CARES Act, despite the many critical things it did, fell short in this area. So for each of the witnesses, and a simple yes or no would do, would you confirm that you support dedicated maritime specific assistance to address the COVID-19 pandemic?
Chris Connor, AAPA, absolutely.
Lauren Brand, National Association of Waterfront Employers, yes, sir.
Eric Ebeling for USA Maritime. Yes,
Sorry,
thank
Mike.
you.
Jennifer Carpenter, American Waterways Operators.
Mike?
Yes, sir.
Mike Roberts, American Maritime Partnership. Yes, sir.
Well, I appreciate that and the crispness of those responses. And seeing no further questions from the members, just a short bit of housekeeping, and I'll release you to your weekends. I'd ask unanimous consent that a record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may have been submitted to them in writing, particularly those that may have been lost due to connectivity issues. I'd also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. If no other members have anything to add, with thanks to all of our witnesses, the subcommittee is adjourned.